I want to welcome you to the fourth plenary session, which is about building Indigenous institutions. My name is Adele Simmons, and I'm a senior advisor to the World Economic Forum. I've been so inspired by the Global Philanthropy Forum that with my colleague Marge Benton in Chicago, we've just started a mini version of this in Chicago, the Chicago Global Donors Network. A brief announcement before we begin. As Susan Bell told you earlier, all of the breakout sessions which follow this will be held in this building in Fisher Hall, which is down at the far end, not in Encina Hall as announced. As we've learned over the years, somewhat to our chagrin, development plans and projects rarely succeed in the absence of a wide range of social, economic, and political institutions. Building these institutions takes patience, perseverance, creativity, wisdom, and a little philanthropy helps. Graça Machel described this morning how she built her organization. What was important were the private resources that helped her get the foundation launched. And then she was able to bring in government resources, and following that, many more private resources. Similarly, private resources helped to launch the microcredit movement. Microcredit is now a household word. The concept began over 20 years ago when Mohammed Yunus began the Grameen Bank. It was a new kind of bank, a bank that provided capital for poor people, and a new kind of institution with a clear mission of eradicating poverty and promoting human development. When Professor Yunus was starting the Grameen Bank, he spent a lot of time with a young Ford Foundation officer named Bill Fuller, talking about the idea. And a few years later, he sat in my living room in Chicago, and we talked about how we could take this concept, or how he could take this concept with MacArthur Foundation funding modestly, and really begin to move this into other countries, one part of taking an idea to scale. Today, we will pick up on that first conversation that took place in Bangladesh only 27 years later. Professor Yunus and Bill Fuller will share their ideas back and forth about microcredit. You know the story of the Grameen Bank. Professor Yunus was the founder, and he's a managing director. Bill Fuller moved from the Ford Foundation to USAID and is now president of the Asia Foundation. He also serves as a trustee of the World Affairs Council of North California. Professor Yunus and Mr. Fuller will discuss the issues together, and since this session is conducted as a conversation, we will not be taking questions. But there will be time afterwards to talk informally with both Bill Fuller and Professor Yunus. So I hope you will take advantage of their presence here and follow up informally. Please join me in welcoming Professor Mohammed Yunus and Bill Fuller.
Okay. Thank you.
How did we rate these seats? You know, we've known one another for 28 years, but I didn't think we were that old.
No sound.
Okay, sound is on. I was just asking how we rated these seats. We've known one another for 28 years, but I didn't think we were that old. Terrific. With the focus of this session on building Indigenous institutions, we thought we would cover three things. First, the evolution of Grameen from an idea to a global institution. Second, some lessons for philanthropy, and we'll weave them in as we go. And then second, some of the opportunities and challenges that lie ahead for Grameen and for microfinancial systems generally. So, Yunus, here we are, sitting together again. How did Grameen begin? What led to the idea that you would be able to provide financial services that would serve the rural poor?
Well, I never discussed Grameen in such a relaxing way.
That's why you're on the telephone books.
And also with someone who goes way back in the Grameen story. Actually, Grameen story began in 1976, and we met in 1976. So our knowing each other goes all the way back when Grameen was just starting. When we began in Bangladesh, what we call Grameen I had no idea what this is all about. Usually people start with an idea, a blueprint, a roadmap, and what have you, business plan, or everything. I had no idea whatsoever. I didn't even have a name for it. It came out of frustrations, really. Frustrations that we go through in many third world countries, where you hope things would be different tomorrow, and you wake up, it's worse than what used to be yesterday. And things were getting worse, and I was teaching in Chittagong University that you visited when you came, teaching economics. And a fresh PhD from the United States coming back home teaching economics with all the arrogance you can get to tell the world that you knew everything. And then you see the year that was particularly in point was 1974, when we were hit by a famine, people dying of hunger. Not few people in one corner of the country, but globally within the country, and hundreds of thousands of people dying of hunger. So you feel funny teaching economics, brilliant theories of economics to your students, while you see things are so different, it doesn't match with your textbooks economics. So that's the frustration that I was going through, and I thought instead of teaching all these things that I don't believe in anymore, why don't I just make myself available to people around the campus who are suffering from this extreme poverty and so on, see if I can make myself useful in some way, not as an economist, because I thought as an economist I'm a total useless person, but as a human being probably I could be of some use to somebody, and that's what I was trying to do. In the process, I found out a lot of little things. All I wanted to do is to be useful to one single person, not to the village. Village to me was too big. Just one person for one day. Even if I could do that, I thought I'm fulfilled. I could do my thing. And I did a lot of little things. But what came on repeatedly, that how people suffered for tiny little money. And that money didn't come by. So they had to go to the money lenders, the loan sharks. And the loan sharks really squeezed them hard to take every bit of their benefit that they got out of the money. And I was shocked when I talked to one woman one day and I found out that all the income she makes goes to the moneylender instead of her retaining it. So I decided to make a list of such people in the village. And it went on for several days, and when my list was complete, there are 42 names on the list. And the total money they needed was $27. And that was the biggest shock for me, because I'm still teaching the National Development Plan for Bangladesh, where millions and billions of dollars have to be invested to help the poor people. And a few years from my classroom, people are not waiting for any millions or billions. They are waiting for a few pennies, and they didn't have it. So my first response was to give this money out of my own pocket and go according to the list, and that was the beginning.
Okay. Now, it's interesting. If I just give a Grantmakers perspective on what Yunus has said, there's a good lesson from this early phase of the Grameen's development. As Yunus said, he was a fresh PhD, and I was Callow Youth with the Asia Foundation in Dhaka. And actually, our first contact had nothing to do with the Grameen Bank. Yunus had a terrific idea, and that was to set up a rural studies program that would take faculty and students out of the university to do action-oriented research in village levels. And we in the Ford Foundation thought that was just dandy, so we went ahead and made a small grant for that. A little later, we then talked about the possibility of testing this notion that it would be possible to make loans, small loans, to landless borrowers, and then they would be good, responsible borrowers. And at the same time, you were interested in testing this idea that women could be credit supervisors in male-dominated Bangladesh. Now, I will tell you that that idea was very different than the original Rural Studies program for Chittagong University. It did not appear in the grant letter that was signed by me on behalf of the Ford Foundation. But there was something that was absolutely inspiring about Yunus, and also he gave us great confidence. As you know, in philanthropy, you bet a lot on leaders. And sometimes you bet more on people than you do on institutions. Yunus had a compelling concept to get resources in the hands of the poor, and he was clearly committed to carrying out that dream, even to the extent of paying $27. He was generous. I should say, just as an aside, in another act of generosity, he gave me one of his dogs. And he called the dog Mohican. And I will tell you that indeed he was the last of his kind, thank goodness. He completely undisciplined, chewed up our cushions. So here we were with this slobbering, quivering gift in one hand and a new proposal in the other, what to do as a grant maker. So we agreed at Ford to go forward and make this grant to test a loan program for the rural poor. Yeah. Later we made other grants that were aimed at institutionalizing, and we'll come to that in a moment, and helped with the expansion of the model to other places within Bangladesh. And two of my later colleagues, Ray Offenheiser and Susan Davis, who were with Ford DACA later, both of whom are here, helped to provide a good deal of creative support later on. And they will also make sure we don't reconstruct history. So, two lessons from this experience, just quickly. First, the obvious lesson that a small grant at the right time with the right person can, in fact, make a difference. But second, in the philanthropy business, never be trapped or blinded by your own goals or objectives, by your letters of agreement, or by the original benchmarks of program success that you set up. These are simply guideposts. Always keep an eye out for the unexpected, which can be a terrific source of creativity and opportunity. So after the test phase, then you had to move this whole program and start to institutionalize it. Tell us a little bit about some of the challenges of moving from Chittagong to Tangail and then institutionalizing this program in Bangladesh.
The Ford Foundation grant for the Rural Economics Program was not actually used for the loan program itself. Because what I was trying at that time, the excitement that was brought to the people, I thought if you can bring so much happiness to so many people with such a small amount of money, why shouldn't you do more of it? So that's the idea that was haunting me. And I thought I could do it by linking the bank with the people. So I went to the bank. So I wanted to see if bank will lend the money. Even if I had all the money in my pocket, I'm not going to give it to them because I thought it's an institutional arrangement rather than a personal thing. Bank refused. Bank said it's a crazy idea to give money to the poor people because they are not creditworthy. So I had a big debate with the bank how they think they are not creditworthy. And I didn't agree with any of the arguments they gave. But I persisted on that. After several months of running around with the banks, finally I found a way. I offered myself as a guarantor. So I'll sign your papers, and you give the money, and I'll stand guarantee for the money that you give. The risk is on me. So I took the risk and gave the money, and finally, after several months of negotiation, they agreed to that. So I took the money from the bank and gave it to people. It worked. Bank said it won't work. I said, look, it worked. They said, well, it may work in one village, but it won't work in 2 villages. So I went ahead and did 2 villages, and still it worked. Then the bank manager said maybe 1 village and 2 villages are the same thing. You should try it several villages. So I went ahead and still I'm just signing the documents as a guarantor. So it's no other money is involved in that. So it went on. Finally, I did it for 50 villages, 100 villages, because every time I'm successful, he raises the number. So if I've done it for 20 villages, he said maybe you should do it for 20. Because it has to fail. But it's not failing. So he was very frustrated. So he wants to make sure that it fails. When I have done it for 100 villages, then I thought, why am I trying to convince him? I'm totally convinced. I know he's lying because in reality, people do pay back. You don't need collateral or anything. So I wanted to create a separate bank. This is when first idea of having a bank came. Until then, I was trying to persuade the banks, conventional banks. So I gave up on the conventional banks. So this is the trial, and government refused it because they thought it's a crazy idea to have a bank for the poor people, because I said this bank will be owned by the poor people and it will work only for the poor people. They said no way. So it took 2 years to convince the government. In 1983, we became the...
I should say there's a little lesson for philanthropy here too. During this stage when he was trying to rope in the state commercial banks to support the Grameen program, we actually scratched our heads in Ford and wondered whether we couldn't work out some kind of a loan guarantee. So we could split losses with the commercial bank up to a certain level and over a specific period of time. And in fact, Ford eventually agreed to do that. And I think it was a $1 million loan guarantee. And if my memory is correct, I think that loan guarantee was never drawn down. That's how successful this program was in those earlier times. So I think a lesson there is simply think leverage. By leveraging the banking system at that time, even though that didn't work out for the long run, we were able to get many more resources into the system than we would have been able to do as a regular donor organization. I wanted to make one other observation before turning you loose on the expansion of the program here. I think another philanthropic lesson for me in this period was doing a better job of understanding the political and social dynamics of the environment in which Grameen was operating. Naturally, as a funder, I was very interested in the financial sustainability of Grameen. And one aspect of the program that concerned me was at the rates that Grameen was charging borrowers, landless borrowers who were getting non-collateralized loans, rates were around 13 to 15%. In the arena of microfinance generally, it's not uncommon to have rates at 25 to 30% to cover loan loss reserves and to cover highly intense supervisory costs. So we had a lot of conversation about that, and you'll remember some of those pestering conversations about why we couldn't get you to get those interest rates up. Well, I'll tell you, there's a response to this, and this is the lesson of philanthropy. The problem wasn't yours. The problem was mine. And what I had missed at the time was a very important political consideration. And that is that the Bangladesh government was providing highly subsidized agricultural credit with rates of 8 to 10%. So just think to yourself what it would have been like for Yunus to charge, say, 20 to 30% for landless borrowers. It would have been politically unsustainable. No way. So there you are. This is true confession after 25 years.
Yeah.
It was my problem, my mistake.
Right. We persuaded the banks to lend money in the beginning, as I said, with me as a guarantor. So all I was doing is to work as an agent of the bank. So I had no control over the interest rate or anything. Whatever they were charging, we were charging from our borrowers to give it back to them. There is no one in between. When we became a bank, as a formal bank, we just followed the same interest rate structure. We didn't want to enhance that thing because we are already into it for several years, and people are familiar with that interest rate. So we followed through the agricultural interest rate that the country had, the same interest rate we charged on our borrowers, and we still covered our costs. We had no problem in covering costs. So that was one thing. Only thing you can say that some of the money that came was interest-free. That's right. Yeah, the first external money, the Ford Foundation was providing most of the research money. It never went into credit money or anything of the sort. So the entire operational cost had to be borne by the interest income, and it was doing that. But the issue was that when we first took the international money as a loan from IFA in 1982, so it came as a soft loan. And people say, you got a subsidized money from the international organization. That's why you are covering costs. We said, okay, we can cover our costs with our own money, even if it's a real interest rate if we had to borrow from the market. And we have done it subsequently. Yeah. Good.
Well, there are many other issues related to institution building at that time, from helping with the development of management staff, technical staff capacity.
More than that, the real problem was what will be this institutional shape.
Yes.
Because government, when they agreed to allow us to have a separate bank, I was insisting that it should be owned by the borrowers, the poor women. Government was opposing that, number one. Government was insisting that this bank should be created under the Banking Companies Act, under the banking law itself. And I was totally opposed to that. I said, only way I can have a bank if you create a separate law for this bank. Because if I'm created under the existing banking law, sooner or later we'll become the same animal as the other banks are. And we don't want to be the same animal. We are different. Because our starting point is very different. Because conventional banks' basic principle is, the more you have, the more you can get. So they are looking for who got the most, and they can give the most. And we reversed that principle. We said, if you have the less, you have the highest opportunity to borrow money from us. If you have nothing, you get absolutely top attention from our bank. So this is the reversal of the whole thing.
And it worked.
And it worked. And you are looking for collateral. We are not looking for collateral. And everything that you do in a conventional bank, you are asking your lawyers to bring all the documents so that you tie him down or tie her down so that if she runs away with the money, you can go and catch her. Yeah. We had no legal instrument whatsoever in our bank. So it's based on trust. Yes. It still is based on trust.
And Grameen became a bank in 1983.
Yes, under a separate law.
You might say a word just about how the system works briefly, because perhaps all of our friends here are unaware.
Yeah. The Grameen Bank works, if you take some of those principles. One principle is people should not come to the bank. Bank should go to the people. So entire Grameen Bank works doing business at the doorstep of the borrowers. So this is another point of departure. And if you keep saying that I don't know anything, why I should borrow money, what do I use the money for, and we train our staff to say, this is the person I'm looking for. Unlike the conventional banks where you have to come and tell you know everything about the business and you have long records and you have beautiful business, if you are looking for that, and you won't be looking for the poor people, because poor people have no business record. Particularly a poor woman in Bangladesh, never been in business. Many argued with us, I don't want to join Grameen Bank because I never touched money in my life. So this is where your starting point is. So this is another one. And we require a person to find 4 other persons with a similar economic situation to form a group of 5. So this is our basic nucleus of our doing business. And our loans are paid back in weekly installments. So a bigger cluster of group is formed with 8 groups of 40 women. We call a center. Every week the center meets. They elect a center chief who conducts the meeting. And the Grameen Bank staff will arrive at the village at the center meeting, do the business at the center meeting. And our loans are for income generating purpose. So you have to explain to your friends, and the group, the 5-member group, becomes the loan committee. If I'm a member of a group, if I'm trying to take a loan, I have to propose it to my own group. And this group of friends, they become the first critique of my business idea. Since we don't know how to read and write, it's all verbal discussions. So you're crazy, you can't handle that kind of money. $50 or $30, too much money for you. Why don't you make it smaller so that you can handle it? So with all those advice, finally, they will approve loan, whatever they want to approve, and it will be recommended to the bigger group of what we call a center, and that will be endorsed by them.
Yeah. So you became institutionalized as a bank, but then you went global.
That's right, yes. Yeah.
And in fact, you provided models for the United States. I've been to Arkadelphia.
Right. At that time, people were saying, well, Grameen can work in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a funny country anyway. All kinds of things can happen. It will never work in any other country. So we're feeling kind of helpless how to prove that it can work in other country too. The first person who came to do that was an economics professor from Malaysia, Professor David Gibbons. He was visiting us in 1982. He was very impressed looking at it. And he said, I want to do it in Malaysia. I said, go ahead. I will be very happy to help you. So he came with his staff and stayed with us to learn how to do it and started the program in Malaysia. This is the first application. Then came Philippines, then came Vietnam, then came Indonesia, other neighboring countries. And then we get a request from Arkansas.
I know.
There's a guy, a governor called Bill Clinton. He sent a message that he wants to start a Grameen program in Arkansas. And that message came through South Shore Bank in Chicago, who became a friend because you invited them to come to Bangladesh to look at Grameen Bank. Does it look like a bank at all? Because they are the bankers from the United States, so you thought their assessment would be a good assessment. So we became good friends, and they were very impressed. They said, gee, we wish we could do it in Chicago. They look so good. And they spread the word to Arkansas, and I was invited. I came and talked to Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton. They were both so enthusiastic about it, immediately wanted it in Arkansas. And out of that was created something called Good Faith Fund in Arkadelphia. So this is 1986. And then it is spread in Chicago, and called Women's Self-Employment Program. It is spread in China, it is spread in India, in Latin American countries, in many, many other countries. But most important thing I must mention, I was narrating this story in a meeting in Chicago, where the Chicago program was going on. I was visiting them. And I was telling a group of people who came to hear me, saying that, look, it's such a great idea, but somehow there are people are interested in many countries, want to do this, but there's no money. Nobody gives them money to get started. So this is one of the biggest problems. And after my presentation, someone sent me a slip, can I come and see you? So I said, of course you can see me. So we went to the next room, and who came over? Adele Simmons. So she was the president of MacArthur Foundation at that time. I didn't know her. So she said, how much money are you talking about? I said, maybe to begin with, I'll need $200,000 to fund these programs around the world. She said, how long will you be in Chicago? I said, for 2 days. Well, I can make sure that you get the check before you leave Chicago.
Here, Adele.
And today she is here.
All right.
I've never seen, you're talking about philanthropy.
Yeah.
I've never seen philanthropy at this supersonic speed.
Yeah, I mean, our grant was only $25,000.
Yes, and she gave $200,000, and I have no papers, nothing. So she deputed one of her colleagues, Kavita Ramdas, she is present here today. So she was following me in the taxis, in the lunches, in the dinners, talking to me, trying to jot down some ideas to create that project proposal. And this is how the project proposal was created.
We will talk to Adele later about accountability at MacArthur. Now let's turn to the really exciting part of Grameen.
And then we create Grameen Trust.
Yes.
To help. This is the money went to the Grameen Trust. That was the beginning of Grameen Trust. Today Grameen Trust works in 32 different countries. There are 122 programs around the world supported by Grameen Trust.
That's what I wanted to turn to. Grameen's accomplishments, and there are many. If I have the numbers right, something now like 75% of families in Bangladesh have access to microfinancial institutions. 46% of Grameen borrowers have apparently lifted themselves out of poverty over time. We might want to talk about loan recoveries are relatively high. There are several Grameen-initiated but independent companies that are providing services for poor rural populations, and as you just mentioned, the Grameen Trust was set up. The World Bank seems to find consistently that populations that are served by microfinancial institutions tend to come out of poverty more rapidly than those who don't, those that don't have access to that. But from your perspective, what were the big achievements? Look back and reflect on what you really saw as breakthrough achievements.
I would say banking will not be the same again. Finish.
Okay, let's move to the next topic.
You cannot go back and say poor are not creditworthy.
Yes.
Now you have to find a way how to address this whole big issue of how do you extend your financial service. Because I've been insisting, and now insist more strongly than I did ever, that credit should be accepted as a human right. Because this is a starting point for any human being to start its economic life, and economic life means also social life and political life, everything else. So this is what is the challenge for future. Still, you'll be surprised how many millions and millions of people around the world just do not qualify to take a loan from a conventional bank. So you have a big room out there to create Grameen programs all over, to lend money without collateral, without any legal instruments, without anything, and based on handshake, based on trust. And it works. And the Grameen Bank is owned by the borrowers, and it is run by their own money. There is no donor money. There is no money that we borrowed from anybody else. So what's wrong? Why can't we do it more of it? This is a question that I raise to everybody. And there are many ways it can be done, either by creating wholesale fund, by supporting programs like Grameen Trust, and we have a program here like Grameen Foundation USA, helping set up programs around the world and connecting people who are interested in it, and Grameen Technology Center to bring the technology into it. So this is how I see the big differences to me.
Yeah. After I defected from Bangladesh, I went to Indonesia and was involved in support for the People's Bank of Indonesia, the Bank Rakyat Indonesia, which has a similar program, more or less based on the Grameen model. And again, most borrowers were first-time borrowers. 85% of the borrowers were women. Loan repayment was about 98%. One of the interesting things about that program is that for every small loan made, almost one brand new job was created. One job for every small loan made. And further, it was very interesting from my perspective, that bank was able to move off subsidies and became fully self-sufficient, relying on depositors. Now, has that happened with Grameen? Are you fully self-sufficient from subsidies?
Yeah. In 1995, we made it clean that we are not going to take any donor money because every donor wants to give us money. World Bank wanted to give us $200 million. We said no to them. When we said in 1995 we are not going to take any money, Japanese government had $100 million for us. And they were very furious because we said from now on we are not going to take any money. Because we had enough money for ourselves. We said, why don't you support the programs in other countries, everywhere else where it's coming, rather than giving the same old organization again and again. So we stopped taking any soft loan or any grant money since 1995. And as I mentioned, the money that comes as a deposit in the bank, that's what goes out as a loan for the borrowers. When our new branches are created now, our new branches first take the deposits from the neighborhoods, from area, and then lend the money to the people. So it's absolutely local money. It's not even money coming from Dhaka, from Grameen Bank head office. It's their own local money going out. And this can be done. This is my biggest frustrations. If it can be done that way, why is it that we are refusing poor people the access to credit, which is so critical?
Now speaking of frustration, despite all of the achievements of Grameen and other microfinancial institutions, there are critics out there.
Sure.
There are some that argue that policy and institutional changes need to be in place to make microfinance really effective. For example, regulations that would support micro-entrepreneurs, make it easier for micro-entrepreneurs to get started. There are others that argue that these systems will always be subsidized, and you kind of answered that. Another point that people make is that often borrowers grow out of a microfinancial institution, have nowhere to go. There's not an intermediate banking level. In the Bank Rakyat Indonesia, they in fact did have that option, and I don't know what the case is in Grameen. And still others would say that the actual quality of the loan portfolio isn't as high as reported because there's so much rollover in the system. How do you respond to these critics?
The first response is they are not familiar with Grameen Bank. They just cooked up all these things. First of all, about the rollover, for example. There is no question of rollover. In Grameen Bank, there are two types of loans. One is called basic loan, and you continue with your loan. If you have any difficulty in paying it back, we put them into what we call a flexible loan, so that your duration of your payment becomes longer, your installment becomes smaller, so that you don't have to show in your rollover situation that you talk about. Rollover means that you, excuse me, you give new loans to people to pay back the old loans. This is unnecessary completely because of the flexibility of the system. So this is a built-in system where you take a longer duration to pay back. And you have all the duration that you can take, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year, and so on. And nobody has to leave Grameen Bank. This is another misconception. Grameen Bank is owned by the borrowers. How can any management ask an owner leave the bank? What is this? So we are here. The entry point is very difficult to enter Grameen Bank. You have to be extremely poor to enter Grameen Bank. Once you are in, you can go as far as you want. The bank has plenty of money to give you the loan. Bank is not short of money.
What's your largest loan?
About $1 million.
You better convert that to dollars.
That will be difficult. Say 50 taka dollar to make it easy.
Go ahead.
Anyway, somebody will do it.
Okay.
So it's a pretty well, $2,500 maybe.
Okay.
It's a large amount. Typical, or the average loan in Grameen Bank is under $100.
Yes.
So sorry, under $200. So that's an average after 27 years. So this is what the general size of the loan. But there are big loans which you can take as if you become successful. The point I was making, there is no restriction in the size of the loan. It's a question of how prepared you are to take the loan. So the question of pushing them out doesn't exist. What are the other criticism you said?
well, subsidy, as I say, I
No,
think
there
you
is no
touched
subsidy
on.
because, as I said,
The regulatory environment is
regulatory,
important.
again, the misconception, Grameen Bank is a bank. It is controlled by the central bank. So what is the problem with the regulatory environment for this? Regulatory environment problem comes for the NGOs in Bangladesh, where there is no regulatory environment. We are all arguing with the government to create a regulatory environment because it's a huge sector right now. There are more than 10 million families who have access to microcredit. Grameen Bank is only 2.7 million families. So the remaining are by the NGOs in Bangladesh. But there is no regulatory body for overseeing the NGO activities. So we are suggesting, only point that we are having problem with the government. Government wants to do it through the central bank. We are arguing that no, there should be independent microcredit regulatory commission, rather than giving it to the central bank. Our argument is central bank doesn't understand microcredit. They will make a mess of it. So I said, although this is banking and the other is banking, and I keep saying that it's a difference between American football versus European football. The name is the same, but the game is different.
And the scoring is different.
And you need a different kind of coach for each one. You can't have the same coach doing both things. So that's why we're saying let's have a different independent regulatory commission to do the regulatory function for the microcredit. So far as the Grameen Bank is concerned, we are suffering to the central bank control. They have always raised questions which has no relevance to us at all, but they go through it all the time.
Right. I was actually thinking more of regulations that inhibit the development of small business. In countries like Indonesia, there's a hideous process that you need to go through to get started.
That's lots of
more
other
work
problems.
that can be done on that.
Sure.
I think
That's,
the better. Now,
government.
with an eye to the clock, look ahead a little bit. What are some of the opportunities and challenges in a practical way, as you always do, and that might be useful for this audience to know about?
First of all, there is a microcredit summit in 1997, a goal set by the microcredit summit to reach 100 million poorest families with microcredit, preferably through the women in those families by the year 2005. So we have that goal already standing there, and we want to achieve that 100 million goal. My best estimation, or my optimistic estimation, is we should be crossing the halfway mark by the end of this year. So 50 million families would be reached by the end of this year globally. But it's still 50 million more to go. And it can be done in the next 2 years, provided the funding is available. So the funding is the critical issue, and we have given lots of ideas how this funding can be organized, through private sector funding, through government funding, bilateral funding, to international development agency like World Bank, regional banks like Inter-American Bank, African Development Bank, and so on. This can be done that way, creating wholesale fund, guaranteed deposits locally, so that you don't bring money from outside. Just tell the government or the central bank that we guarantee the deposits taken by the organization, a specific organization, so that they can raise the money locally. Because the locally this money is available. We don't have to bring money from outside. Simply, law doesn't exist to help you do that. So legal framework is important. Okay. This is one area. The second area that I should mention is the Millennium Development Goal, where the global commitment is to reduce the number of poor people by half by the year 2015. It's a grand declaration. It's the boldest declaration human being ever made. Are we proceeding to achieve that goal? Or simply we got the headline in the newspaper and forgot all about it, and life as usual? This is middle of 2003. 2015 is not too far away. If you want to achieve, and I do want to achieve, I think it's important and we can achieve, and I'm totally convinced that we can achieve that, to reduce the number of poor people in the world by half by the year 2015, provided we bring the policies in place, provided we bring the instruments in place, institutions in place. And one of the most critical institutions will be the credit institutions, the financing institutions. And it can be done. Let's do it. Reach half the number of poor people by 2015 with microcredit, or even for all the people in microcredit. And it's a business. It's not a charity. It's not a do-away, give-away. It's a business. And this business creates new business. and people change their life. One thing that we didn't discuss, the impact of this money, what happens to the life of the poor people. Today, all the children of Grameen families are in school. Many of them are in universities. We give the student loan to support that. And coming from the illiterate families, they are now moving into universities. So 100% literacy and education for the children of Grameen families. And they have their pension fund, so that if they grow old, they will still have money to support themselves without resorting to their children to take care of them. And the housing loan of Grameen Bank, more than 500,000 houses have been built with Grameen Bank money. And you name it, in terms of income, in terms of social status, in terms of technology. We have brought the cell phones in the villages. We created a cell phone company called Grameen Phone to bring cell phone to the village, and the Grameen borrower to become the telephone lady of the village, to sell the service of the telephone. Now this is a very successful business, as a Grameen Phone is a successful business. It's the largest cell phone telephone company in the whole of South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, all put together. And then these women make enormous money by just selling telephone service. It ranges from $50 a month to all the way $500 a month, just by selling those services. So bring technology, that's the last point. Bring information technology to the poor people, so that the goal of the dream of reducing the number of poor people by half in the year 2015 is achieved, and we can quickly put the poverty in the museum where it belongs.
All right. That was great.
Thank you.
That was fun. You were terrific as always.
Well, those of us who weren't in the Fuller living room with Yunus, the dog, and the proposal have been delighted to eavesdrop on your conversation today, to find out what happened since that proposal and what your lessons learned. And there's one theme that I think follows through all of this, and that is the importance of trust. But the impact of your work, Yunus, is felt every day. The matricular movement in this country, which is an effort to give identity cards to undocumented Mexicans, has been supported by the banks. And they would not be providing that support if you hadn't made it clear that these people would be good customers for our banks. So thank you very much. Thanks to both of you. We're going to take a 30-minute break.
Okay.
The first round of breakout sessions will begin at 3:15, and I remind you that it's going to be, there will all be in Fisher Hall, which is straight down the hall as you exit this room. The sessions will be posted on signs in the rooms, and Global Philanthropy Forum volunteers and staff will help anyone who needs directions. We have 2 rounds of breakout sessions this afternoon, and the second begins at 4:45. Thank you all.